So that's the kind of challenge with a limit-fed bird is if we do something wrong, it's not like they can just eat more and get to their requirement. We're going to restrict feed them this whole time, so there's more of an emphasis on everything being perfect from the formulation and into management.
Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of Poultry Nutrition Blackbelt. I'm your host, Dr. Fatima Adekari from Mississippi State University. Welcome everyone. Today we have a very special guest in our podcast, Dr. J.T. Pope from House of Raeford. He's a nutritionist over there and he has been working a couple of years in the company. Dr. Pope, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We're very glad today we're going to learn a little bit about the breeder nutrition, which so far I remember I have not covered that topic in my podcast. It's going to be very exciting for those of you who are listening today. So a little bit, I want to start the program with your introduction about you and your company. JT, if you can tell us about that.
Yeah, so as you said, my name is JT Pope. I work with House of Raeford, and I've been with them for about 5 years now. And we kind of have operations throughout the southeast of the United States, and we process around 4 million broilers a week, and we all grow large birds, so they're 9 to 10 pound broilers, and of course we feed all of the breeders associated with processing 4 million broilers a week.
Proven on the farm, trusted on the plate, let our technologies help make your production goals a reality. Learn from the experts how carbohydrates can improve nutrient utilization, gut health technologies differ by type, and how liquid smoke can light your bird performance on fire. Carey isn't just leading in animal agriculture, we're innovating it.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I know we want to know, a lot about breeder nutrition today. So I know we restrict feed breeders. What are the common challenges at today's day? Again, I'm not just going into the nutrition, but maybe in the management side of it. So what are the real challenges with that and what you want to let the audience tell us what's there?
Certainly. So broiler breeders are interesting because they are limit fed, as you mentioned earlier, which is quite a bit different than most of the animals that we get to study in, our nutrition classes, or really most of the animals that nutritionists work with outside of poultry. And because they are limit fed, it kind of changes our approach to how we make diets and feeding programs for them, and kind of the consistency that we ask of those diets. So whenever we're starting to formulate broiler breeder diets, the first thing we're going to look at is trying to make sure that the daily intake of nutrients is sufficient for them to perform well. So as a pullet to either gain body weight at the proper rate, or as a breeder to give us eggs. So daily intake of nutrients is the number one thing. And we can work that backwards to our formulation program to assign an energy level and amino acid levels that should be sufficient for the animal to perform. So the formulation side of things for us, we try to keep things very simple and consistent, because if a manager or a service technician is out there on the farm and their birds aren't gaining weight at the proper rate, we want them to know exactly what that feed package will do every time they give a feed increase. So if they're behind on weight and they say we need to give them a little more feed, they need to know exactly how much feed will allow that bird to gain the weight target that they want to hit. So keeping it consistent is very important, because if we're changing the formulas all the time, changing the energy levels, changing the amino acid levels, the people that are actually feeding the birds on the farms will never know how the bird will respond to those increases in feed. So the formulation side of things are pretty simple. If you have a good feed package that's working well, minor tweaks will allow you to continue to be successful, I believe. Some of the biggest problems we have, though, as I said, is in that daily intake of nutrients. You can write it down on a piece of paper and have your feed formulation perfect, but if we send a feed out to a farm and it is not distributed properly, put on a scale properly, there's no chance that we're going to be successful feeding pullets and breeders. So that's the kind of challenge with a limit-fed bird is if we do something wrong, it's not like they can just eat more and get to their requirement. We're going to restrict feed them this whole time, so there's more of an emphasis on everything being perfect from the formulation and into management. And some of the biggest management problems we run into because these birds eat so rapidly is that there's not enough feed volume to distribute feed throughout the entire house. And that's something that we're constantly working on, and pullets and especially young breeders as well, is trying to make sure that there is enough volume of feed there to feed every single chicken all of the food that it wants to get. And that's where some of the largest disparities come into uniformity for us is probably not dietary. It's not large variations in the nutrients that we're formulating to. It's because when we send the feed into the house, if we have too many birds on each pan and there's too much competition at the feed pan, that means a bird doesn't eat. And if that bird doesn't eat, it doesn't matter what you formulate it to. If one bird consumes 20% more than they should have and another bird consumes 20% less than they should have because they're limit fed, there's no opportunity for our formulation to have a positive impact in that situation. So management is very key, and feed distribution is just as important as the formulation when it comes to rearing and successful breeders.
That's a very good elaborative discussion or answer that you just gave us because of the how they are limit fed, and then we want to make sure that we are not overfeeding because the intake of nutrients would depend on the amount of feed intake, right? The more they eat, we just don't want to give them more. Going to the limit intake or intake of feed, is there a kind of certain gram in a day or per 100 birds that you feed for? Like what is our limit fed and what is how do you restrict? Like what amount? Please give me some range of number here, like per day basis.
Yeah, so without going to a chart, I'll just use kind of a simple example that comes to my mind. And I think we never even started off with why is it that we restrict them. And the reason that we restrict them, most people probably know, but that's because, the attributes that bird has genetically to become a broiler do not mesh well with them becoming sexually mature and laying an egg. So we are trying to prevent them from gaining a whole lot of muscle mass and not being fit for reproduction. And we do that by limiting the amount of feed that they eat. But with our operations, just for an example, the most amount of feed that we would ever give a breeder is probably about 0.35 pounds per day. And just to put that in perspective, that's a bird that's almost 30 weeks old that we're doing that to. And to put that in relative terms to a broiler, whenever we are finishing our broiler flocks, on average, they're consuming almost half a pound a day, which means we have some birds that are probably eating 0.6 of a pound a day. So they are restricted, but they're also, they're not, the demand for growth is not there. That's why our broilers, when they get older, they're eating a ton of feed because there's a lot of demand there to grow. But these birds are pretty stable in their body weights as they come into lay or after they come into lay, and then they're just reproducing. So they're just laying eggs, and that's what we're feeding them for.
Yeah, very good. So talking about switching a gear a little bit here, when do you start restricting this? At what age pullets start restricting the feed? And also what things that you look for? I'm sure you have to bring your flock into uniformity, right? Before you think, okay, they are ready to lay. So what is kind of that age? When do you start restrict feeding?
Yeah, so, the birds are placed and fed ad libitum for a week, typically. So they have access to as much feed as they want to. And then we'll start using weighed feed amounts probably week 2 of their life. And the amount of feed that we're giving them, they can't consume all of that feed in a day. So it kind of builds up. Week 3 to week 4 is when we really start restricting them. And because of the density of the diets, we actually have to start skip feeding them. We feed them one day and then they have an off day. And then we feed them the next day and then an off day. And that usually starts occurring around 3 weeks. And that will last almost until we move them into a breeder house, which is 21, 22-ish weeks. And then they'll come into lay. So, and one of the things that we see is like uniformity in the pullet house is kind of difficult to achieve because there's so much pressure on the feed pans. There's so much pressure on the feed system to keep up with these birds that eat really fast. But as we continually give them more and more feed, and they start getting heavy feed increases at about week 16, try to start to develop some fat to come into lay. And as we start to give them more feed, they obviously become more uniform because more feed means more access for all of the chickens in the house. So we might run uniformities that are around 70% around 16 weeks. And once you bring them into lay, they're almost like 90-something% uniformity, just because of the amount of feed that they have access to.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that uniformity, like a flock uniformity percentage, like layers, because I would with layers, and we cannot try to achieve more than 80% would be a good flock at the pullet phase, and then you go, and maybe that chances are staying, in that range more than that. But no, that's great. So what is what is a trend going on right now with the breeder feeding? I know we do just restrict feeding, but what about it? What is exciting that you feel, you're going to be in this profession maybe next couple of years and you're looking forward to that you can share?
Yeah. So breeder nutrition is a lot of fun. Breeder management is a lot of fun. It's kind of the busiest farms. They're the ones that have the most amount of, I would say, animal husbandry involved in producing good flocks. And some of the things that I think that I see on the horizon is one, the genetics, just put it frankly, one of the genetic companies shared with everybody recently that the birds today are eating 50% faster than they were 10 years ago. So that is a major, major hurdle and issue for us because our feed equipment has remained the same. Our diets are probably pretty similar to what they were 10 years ago, but the bird is consuming feed at twice the speed. So that's really difficult to cope with. And I think it's going to give us problems, and we're going to have to be innovative in the ways that we approach feeding breeders in the future. If you talk to old breeder managers, they'll talk about how easy it was to manage breeders 30 years ago or even 20 years ago. And I think those days are gone because this is like a high performance race car we're dealing with now. And if it gets a little bit off the track, you're in trouble. So there's going to be a lot more emphasis on management going forward. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to redesign our feeding systems. If we could presentation feed pullets, which is where there's no equipment involved, you can run all the feed and all the feed they're going to eat is just present, and then you just give it to them. So you don't have to wait on equipment to run or worry about feed being distributed. It's just already distributed, and you just let the pullet eat like when the lights come on, or there's several ways to do it. I think we could make drastic improvements in pullet rearing if we could figure out how to presentation feed them. A practical way to presentation feed pullets on a daily basis would make for a very good breeder, in my opinion. And, that's something that ourselves and other companies have started doing too, is we've looked at feeding pullets every day. And there are some pretty major dietary changes that have to occur, and management has to be very, very good when you do that. But it is possible for us to feed breeders every day. And when we've done it, we've seen that the birds give us more eggs. Their gut health problems seem to be, alleviated, and the quality of the flocks have been really good. So it wouldn't surprise me if we saw major changes in feed equipment and the way that we feed breeders. And depending on what happens with kind of political and social pressures, if, certainly in 20 years, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we were feeding breeders every day.
Awesome. So thank you very much for sharing all these kind of, again, a highlight, because since it's a very short podcast, I guess we have to meet again or kind of have a part 2 or 3 and to know more about the breeder. I really appreciate your time today, Dr. JD Pope, and I really wish all the best for the company and for you, what you are going to maybe see and learn, and also provide all this education to the young people who are out there to the industry, poultry industry, and who are interested in breeder nutrition. Again, do you have anything to say to the audience before we depart today?
No, that's it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So this is the podcast, Poultry Nutrition Blackbelt. Again, this is Dr. JD Pope in today's episode, and I'll see you next time very soon.